The original Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota Nation covered a vast area from the Mississippi River north into what is now Canada and south into modern-day Nebraska and stretching as far west as Wyoming and Montana. Today, most of the 108,000 members of the nation live on reservations here in what is now North and South Dakota. Although the effects of modern times are everywhere, traditional spirituality is very much alive in the community.
Black Elk's teaching was that the importance of the ceremony is in understanding the meaning of the ceremony, and that the meaning of the ceremony is that nothing lives well except when it lives in a manner suited to the way the power of the universe lives and moves to do its work. So when you live consciously in concert with the earth, you live well.
Many traditional Lakota believe that peace for all people and true harmony with the environment are not only possible, but necessary for the future of life on Earth. That each part of creation is connected to all other parts and the whole.
If we are going to survive in this world with a quality of life, there's tremendous challenge that we have to be brought back to living harmoniously and living consciously.
In the 1990s, a group of Lakota youth and elders began leading annual peace and unity rides. The rides, open to everyone, regardless of background or ethnicity, consist of a journey to a different sacred site, followed by a prayer for peace.
The elders' hope is to inspire similar journeys and prayers in communities all over the globe. Many Lakota see in these rides an invaluable vision of peace for all the peoples of the world.
On horseback, you have that close connection to life around you and to the movement of life and how sacred life is. And you can only understand that when you ride a horse, when you are part of another being.
The horse is like a bridge between the spirit world and our material world. And when we sit on the horse in this ceremony, the horse carries our bodies, but they also carry our prayers and our spirits.
And then you make a connection with an animal, and unwittingly you're making a connection with those who came before you, just by touching that animal and relating to it in some way, taking care of it.
They allow me to feel some of the things that my ancestors felt 100 years ago. To feel the wind through your hair as you're riding across the prairie. To feel connected to the earth.
This connection, not only to the earth, but to all living things, is a large part of the message the Peace and Unity Ride movement is hoping to spread to the world. Peace and Unity Rides have roots deep in the suffering and ultimate recovery of the Lakota people. For thousands of years, the North American continent was home to some 20 million indigenous people, making up more than 180 distinct cultures. But in the last few hundred years, cultural conflicts between the Native Americans and the newly arrived Europeans grew. For the Lakota, these conflicts climaxed in 1890. In South Dakota, at a place called Wounded Knee.
Because you see, at Wounded Knee, they killed our relatives. That's deep.
We were the people who had defeated the United States government, not once, but several times. We have the only treaty that was negotiated initially on our terms. And the government had to burn its forts and evacuate our lands. So we were a severe threat.
By 1890, many Lakota had incorporated a religious movement known as the Ghost Dance into their way of life.
The Ghost Dance began with the Paiute man named Wovoka in 1889 and quickly spread through many different tribes.
Among the Lakota, ghost dancing was seen as a way to restore the self-governed tranquility of the past, as well as to make the dancers impervious to the bullets of white men's guns.
The government was so afraid of the ghost dance that they had outlawed it by this time. And of course, Sitting Bull's people were ghost dancing.
That winter, government officials ordered Sitting Bull's arrest. General L.W. Colby, commander of the Nebraska National Guard, later wrote that the death of the famous old medicine man was much preferred to his capture, and that the slightest attempt to rescue him should be the signal for his destruction. So on December 15th, 47 local Indian police were sent to Sitting Bull's camp at dawn, and he was killed.
After Sitting Bull was killed, of course, his people, retaliated, and they shot a bunch of those Indian police there. And then they fled. And so they ran, and they ran down to Bridger, which is where Bigfoot was camped at that time, and his people were also ghost dancing.
Bigfoot was a peacemaker, a person we called the keeper of the white wing, the owner of the trumpeter swan's wing, someone who could arbitrate a peace.
Worried for their safety, Bigfoot and many of his people joined with Sitting Bull's followers. The next night, they all began the arduous winter journey to Pine Ridge, where another Lakota leader named Red Cloud was camped.
Because Red Cloud was friendly with the United States government in such a way that he was granted special favors at different times. And they thought that maybe he could save them because they figured they had done something where they were going to get wiped out. They started going towards Pine Ridge, and they were very ill prepared. They had to leave most everything. They didn't have much, and they didn't have nearly enough mounts for all the people they had. And they just ran for days, and of course they couldn't build fires at nights, and they were all freezing to death, and they had to kill their horses and eat their horses, and they would cut their horses open and stick their babies inside to keep them warm. And they were poorly dressed, and it was cold. It was the middle of the winter. It was inconceivable. On December 28th, they were intercepted at Porcupine Butte by the 7th Cavalry. And they were escorted to Wounded Knee Creek.
There is some disagreement over whether any of the 100 or so young men among the 400 Indians at Wounded Knee had weapons at this point. Many believe the Lakota to have been entirely disarmed by their captors, while some white accounts indicate that a number of the Indian men were refusing to give up their guns. One Lakota who survived the day, Dewey Beard, said that while soldiers were trying to disarm a deaf Lakota who didn't understand what was happening, his gun went off and soldiers panicked. But no one disputes how the day turned out.
They were so afraid of this poor, ragged, defenseless band of Indians, and they had howitzers up on the hills, and they just started firing them. And they just decimated this whole tribe in just a matter of minutes, this whole band of people. None of the Indians were armed. They didn't have any way to defend themselves, and soldiers were still killed because they killed each other. They killed babies and old people, you know, and that's not warfare, that's just craziness.
All told, more than 250 Lakota were killed that day at Wounded Knee. Among the dead were Chief Bigfoot, the peacemaker.
And today, we still carry that. It really hurts. Even to talk about it. Look like it just happened a year ago or so when you talk about it.
And when Bigfoot was killed, there was a wrenching among Lakota people.
That was what changed us, was the massacre at Wounded Knee. That the only way to survive was to give up and to go to the reservations. And so we did.
They did their best to assimilate us into a system that would never belong to us. The sacred hoop was broken around 1890. That's when we weren't allowed to live a way of life, a natural way of life.
Sitting Bull being killed, Bigfoot being killed was traumatic. But I think that you can't overlook the absolute horror of the attempt to tear us from ourselves. When you throw away the right of peacemaking, someone who is an arbitrator, and throw it in the muddy, bloody snow, it prevents you from having reconciliation. And so we've lived with more than a century of unresolved grief, not just for Bigfoot, but also for the lifeways that were torn from our people, for the trauma that was visited among our people in this whole era of bureaucratic genocide that's occurred in the last 120, 130 years of American history.
The elders kept it alive, a ceremony, because they too always knew that our way of life is going to come back.
As the 100-year anniversary of Wounded Knee approached, a respected Lakota medicine man named Curtis Kilsry was visited by a powerful dream of peace and healing. Soon other Lakota elders began to have the same vision.
Well, the dream that I talked about, the recurring one, and it sort of stood out in my mind even now, where I find myself riding amongst a whole group of wagons and walkers and other riders.
The elders foresaw a spiritual ride on the 100-year anniversary of the massacre.
It would follow the route that Chief Bigfoot had taken, stretching from Sitting Bull's death place at McLaughlin, South Dakota, all the way to Wounded Knee in the dead of winter.
In the seventh generation, we got direction from a holy man named Curtis Kilsry. And he's the one who had a vision quest, and he directed us to go, and in 1986, to ask a Lakota to get on horseback, to go on a spiritual journey was just unheard of.
Curtis Kilsry foresaw many Lakota people riding together to release their grief at long last. And in the winter of 1990, the people came together and the journey began. The ceremonial journey would be called the Mending of the Sacred Hoop Ride.
Day after grueling day, the riders made their way through the frozen countryside.
when I went on that ride, you know, they said that 1990 was exactly 100 years from when the massacre at Wounded Knee happened. And it happened to be that 100 years later, it was about the same temperature. And I almost froze to death. It was an experience that made me understand how strong those people had to be, my ancestors had to be. I felt like I had, for an instant, reached through all the barriers of time that separate my life from my ancestors' life, and I was there with them. I felt the freezing cold, and I could almost feel the sheer desperation that they must have felt, trying to just run away and survive, be able to let their children live another day.
Today, we're curing ourselves from that trauma, that grief, and we're coming out of it. We were given instructions that we were supposed to oichile, or you're supposed to seek within yourself. And this way, we look for our place in this universe. Was we put the Lakota back on horse. And once you take the man or the female, and you take a horse, and you join their spirit, then you become Lakota again.
It's one thing to read about something and to feel something, but to actually go and be around people who are descendants of people who were there, and many of whom didn't make it, you know, that day, December 29th, 1890. It's very moving, and then to be on a ride where you're making a conscious ritual effort to connect with those people and their sacrifice. It wasn't hard to do, to imagine them, and to feel in some sense that, you know, that they were there.